Welcome to day 10 of our study of the book of Ecclesiastes. Our lesson today is entitled, Two Are Better Than One. Our reading today comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Again I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead, who are already dead, more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been, and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity, and a striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after wind. Again I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, "For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure?" This also is vanity, and an unhappy business. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better was a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity, and a striving after wind. In John Steinbeck's epic Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Grapes of Wrath, he tells the story of the Joad family from Oklahoma who pack up and journey to California during the Great Depression of the 1930s. Hoping to find good-paying jobs there, the family presses on through hardships and the death of loved ones along the way. They find overwhelming oppression and the exploitation of the destitute and starving families when they arrive. Workers try to organize for better pay and conditions, and in turn are met with violence and death. Tom Joad, a young man who had been incarcerated in Oklahoma for homicide and self-defense, once again finds himself fighting against those who kill others, and in doing so kills another man there in California. In a tearful goodbye between the mother and Tom, he gives a speech about where he is going to go from there as he flees the law. He says, "Well, maybe like Casey says, a fella ain't got a soul of his own, just a little piece of a big soul. The one big soul that belongs to everybody. Then it don't matter. I'll be all around in the dark. I'll be everywhere. Wherever you can look. Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. I'll be in the way guys yell when they're mad. I'll be in the way kids laugh when they know supper's ready. When the people are eating the stuff they raise and living in the houses they build, I'll be there too." Solomon turns again to the human condition here in chapter 4. People are oppressed by those in positions of power, as we see in verses 1 through 3. They're oppressed by the envy of others in verse 4. They're laden in loneliness in verses 6 through 12. Finally, in this chapter, the uncertainty of those who will rule over them. How unusual that a king should write such things as oppression, the deficiency and wanton rule of the monarchy over a country, seeing by his wisdom he would rule justly and in righteousness. Yet, couched in this melancholy vision of the way the world works, Solomon gives a maxim, a proverb, as it were, for life. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil, in verse 9. This he proclaims having considered the sad state of what he had seen under the sun, in verse 8. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil. And his eyes are never satisfied with riches, though he never asks, "For whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure?" This also is vanity and an unhappy business. Yes, Solomon's insightful observation is spot on. What's more, he gives wisdom's cure for that which he had observed earlier by the oppressed. In verses 10 through 12 we read, "For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up." Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Far too often the cry of the bereft, the beggared, and the busted is to declare in their hopelessness just what Solomon said in verse 2. "And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive." Still, there is a solution close to us. In hopelessness, we may think the solution lies always within ourselves. To care for only ourselves may be the tendency of many. The answer lies in sharing the load, bearing the burden of others, and banding together for support and protection. For so the inspired writer tells us in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." And again, Paul speaks in Romans chapter 15, verses 1 and 2. "We who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak, and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, to build him up." Paul writes again in Philippians chapter 2 and verses 3 through 5. "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus." For the believers, Jesus declared in Matthew 18:20, "For where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I among them." In the oppressed and destitute and downtrodden in your walk, have you sought to be a part of the solution? And Lord willing, let's meet here again tomorrow for another lesson from the book of Ecclesiastes.